Communism crumbles. The Chinese Communist Party was holding on to China, but the Communist Party in the Soviet Union was beginning to change. Glasnost and perestroika were causing ripples that ran through all of the other communist countries in Eastern Europe. The most dramatic ripples were felt in Germany. You'll remember that after World War II, Germany was divided into two countries. West Germany had a democratic government, and East Germany had a communist government. Life in East Germany was hard. Under communism, people suffered. There were few jobs and not enough food. And the East Germans couldn't leave their country and go west because a wall trapped them in their half of the country. In the years that Germany was divided, about 10,000 East Germans tried to escape to West Germany. Some of them made it. 2 families floated over the wall in a hot air balloon. In 1964, one group of Berliners dug a 164-foot tunnel from a bakery in West Berlin to an outhouse in East Berlin. The digging took 6 months, but hundreds of people crossed through it to freedom before East German officials found out about the tunnel and shut it down. In September 1989, East Germans began to take Glasnost, freedom of speech, seriously. They began to hold large, loud protests and rallies. They insisted that the communist government of East Germany allow them to travel to West Germany or to anywhere else in the world. After a month of protests, the East German government could no longer resist. On November 9, 1989, the gates in the Berlin Wall were thrown open. East Germans poured through them. For the first time in many years, Germans could travel freely between the two Germanys. Germans began to tear at the wall. They hammered at it, broke it down with shovels and tools and iron bars, and took chunks of it away. A man named Andreas Ramos, who went to the wall that weekend, wrote, "The East German border was always a serious place. Armed guards kept you in your car, watching for attempts at escapes. Tonight was a different country. Over 20,000 East and West Germans were gathered there in a huge party. Everyone had their radios on, and everywhere was music. People had climbed up into trees, signs, buildings, everything to wave and shout. On both sides, the guard towers were empty, and the barbed wire was shoved aside in great piles. From the East German side, we could hear the sound of heavy machines. With a giant drill, they were punching holes in the wall. Every time a drill poked through, everyone cheered. Many were using hammers to chip away at the wall. There were countless holes. At one place, a crowd of East German soldiers looked through a narrow hole. We reached through and shook hands." By November 11th, it was clear that more than the wall was coming down. The communist rule over East Germany was falling too. In 1990, East and West Germany were reunited into one country. In the USSR, more changes were on the way. Gorbachev was trying to change his country. Remember, the USSR was made up of Russia plus a number of smaller communist countries. Gorbachev himself was the leader of the whole USSR. A Russian leader named Boris Yeltsin thought that Gorbachev's reforms were happening too slowly. He believed that it was time to move towards a democracy much more quickly, and he had plenty of followers. But another group of powerful communist leaders were resisting all of Gorbachev's changes. They didn't want the Soviet Union to become more open or more free. In August 1991, 8 of these determined communists planned a takeover of the Soviet Union. They surrounded Gorbachev's house, locked his doors, and cut his telephone lines so that he couldn't contact anyone on the outside. Then they ordered him to resign. Gorbachev refused. So the 8 conspirators announced in public that he was too sick to run the country, and that one of them would begin to act as Soviet leader in Gorbachev's place. When Boris Yeltsin heard what was happening, he called to all of his followers in Russia to gather behind him. Not only did thousands of Russians who wanted democracy come to join Yeltsin, so did the tanks and soldiers that the conspirators sent to arrest Yeltsin and get him out of the way. None of the army would follow the conspirators. The Communist Party had lost its power to control the Russian people, and Russia was the largest country in the USSR. The conspirators gave up. One of them killed himself. Gorbachev, once he'd gotten out of his house, joined with Boris Yeltsin to decide what to do next. He banned all Communist Party meetings and ordered every Communist Party office in the country locked up. Over the next few months, the countries that had been brought into the Soviet Union declared their independence one by one. Ukraine, Lithuania, Latvia, Armenia, and all of the rest. When it was over, Gorbachev resigned. He had no more Soviet Union to govern. Boris Yeltsin would serve as the head of the ancient country of Russia, no longer communist and no longer part of the USSR. Chapter 42. Okay. The End of the 20th Century. The First Persian Gulf War. In 1991.
Here you go, Sidge. Would you hold this for me so we can discuss, Sidge, please. 41 part 2, which is Communism Crumbles. So here's the video, the picture right here, Sidge. And I'm going to flip back to my map for the second part. And it says, in 1990, East and West Germany were reunited into one country. Label the Reunited Germany on your map. And we watched some videos on that, right? With the wall coming down, didn't I? On a previous one. Yeah, the Communist Party had lost its power to control the Russian people, and Russia was the largest country in the USSR. Label Russia on your map. And over the next few months, the countries that had been brought into the Soviet Union declared their independence one by one. Ukraine, Lithuania, Latvia, Armenia, and all the rest. And it asks you to find and label those countries. And then I wanted to read this because it does go with this. So Sidge, if you could zoom in over here, I'm just going to kind of read this. So by the 1980s, the communist countries of Eastern Europe were facing serious problems. People there were much poorer than in the West, and in some of the countries, there wasn't enough food for everyone. The communist rulers were very unpopular, and they relied on the support of the Soviet Union and its army to keep them in power. So in 1985, so I was 7 years old, Mikhail Gorbachev became leader of the Soviet Union and began modernizing the country. He was in leadership from 1985 to 1991. And you can always remember him because he had that huge birthmark on his head.
No, that's not that big.
Well, it was obvious. Gorbachev allowed people to set up their own businesses and to vote freely in elections for the first time. He also made it clear that the Soviet Union would no longer help the communist leaders of Eastern Europe to stay in power. So here's a map, and Isaac, you may want to come and see this, of former communist countries. So all the purple were part of the Soviet Union, and then these were the Eastern European countries here.
Were those communist?
Countries that were part of the... Yes.
But I don't think they are anymore.
But they weren't part of the...
USSR.
Right. I believe that's true.
I don't think they're communist anymore.
No, everything has changed now. So in 1988, thousands of workers in Poland went on strike to protest against the government. The Polish communist leaders were forced to allow elections, and the workers' trade union, and so that's where we are right here, Poland, known as Solidarity, won a huge victory. In August 1989, a non-communist prime minister was elected, and a year later, the Solidarity leader, Lech Walesa, became the president of Poland. So this is the Solidarity logo, which includes the red and white flag of Poland. So East Germany was one of the strictest communist countries, and people there were forbidden. So you turned my camera, didn't you, from how I had it set up originally? So this is all going to be sideways.
No, the other way is going to be sideways. Because this way is sideways, this way is not.
But I started it up and down, so that's the way it's going to go.
It is?
Yeah. So why don't you turn it back? So East Germany was one of the strictest communist countries, and people there were forbidden to travel to the West. In September 1989, Hungary opened its border with Austria. So we're talking about right over here. Hungary opened its border with Austria. Thousands of East Germans began escaping through Hungary into Austria and West Germany. Meanwhile, inside East Germany, there were massive protests against the communist government. On November 9, the German government agreed to let people travel freely to the west. In Berlin, people climbed onto the wall that divided the two parts of the city, and the gates were opened for the first time in over 25 years. Thousands of East Germans crossed into West Berlin. In March 1990, East Germany voted to join West Germany, and on October 23, the two countries became one again. Berlin later became the capital of the new United Germany. And here you can see people from East and West Germany celebrating together at the Berlin Wall just after the wall was opened in November 1989. By the end of 1989, all the old communist leaders of Eastern Europe had been replaced. In most countries, this happened peacefully, but in Romania, the brutal communist ruler Nicolae, and I can't pronounce his last name, was taken prisoner and executed. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, the republics of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania decided to break away and form countries of their own. Other regions tried to do the same, and fighting broke out in some places. And here's Boris Yeltsin that we just heard about in the video, president of Russia from 1991 to 99. President Gorbachev resigned, and on December 31, 1991, the Soviet Union split into 15 independent countries. The largest of these was the Republic of Russia, led by the non-communist Boris Yeltsin. With the fall of communists, the Cold War became the West, and the Soviet Union was finally over.
The Cold War became the West?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I read that wrong. The Cold War between the West and the Soviet Union was finally over. Okay.